Okay, let's unpack this. You use it every single day without a second thought. But what if I told you the history of the little word a is actually a fascinating journey through Old English and beyond?
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the incredible world of word histories, a journey that reveals how the words we use every single day have evolved, sometimes in surprising, sometimes hilarious, and always fascinating ways. Forget what you think you know about language. Our mission today is to cut through the info overload and give you those aha moments about the very building blocks of our communication.
What's fascinating here is how words are like living fossils. They carry traces of ancient cultures, forgotten beliefs, and even linguistic mistakes within their very structure.
Linguistic mistakes, I love that.
Right. We'll be looking at how our language reflects shifts in society, technology, and even how we perceive the world. This raises an important question. If words change so much, what does that tell us about meaning itself? And how stable is it really?
That's a profound question, and it's precisely what we're going to explore. To bring you these incredible insights, we've taken a deep dive into a comprehensive dictionary of word histories, the kind of source you could get lost in for weeks, and meticulously extracted the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight.
Hmm.
Think of it as your shortcut to being truly well informed about the etymological tapestry of English, with surprising facts, clear connections, and just enough humor to keep you hooked. We're going to show you how a word's journey can reveal hidden layers of history, culture, and even human psychology. So let's jump right in.
Let's do it.
Let's begin at the literal forefront of many words with those small but mighty prefixes. You might think they're straightforward, almost like simple linguistic labels, but this is where the true linguistic magic happens. Take the humble A or N. It feels so fundamental, doesn't it?
It does, and it's surprisingly complex for such a tiny part of speech.
Yeah.
So the indefinite article, that little A you use before a consonant sound or and before a vowel sound, has a surprisingly robust and revealing history.
Hmm.
In Middle English, it was actually just "an," always "an."
Always N, real,
Yep.
huh?
And that "an" was simply a weaker, unstressed form of the Old English word "adn't," A-D-N, which meant one.
One.
One. So when you say a book, you are quite literally echoing centuries of linguistic history,
Yeah.
subtly implying one book or a certain single book in a very ancient way.
That's truly incredible. So it literally started its life as a numerical concept, one.
Yeah.
But then what happened to that N and N when it started appearing before a consonant? Why did it vanish?
That's where the language started to smooth itself out for phonetic convenience, a
Yeah.
really common driver of linguistic change, what sounds easier.
Right.
The N and N was commonly kept even as late as the 15th century before W and Y sounds. Can you imagine saying Edward or Yer?
And wood and year. Ugh. No, that sounds really clunky to my ears now. It's like a little tongue twister almost. Your mouth wants to skip that in.
Exactly. And even more strikingly, by the 17th century, it was still regularly kept before H sounds, so people would commonly say "an house" or "100."
And house.
Wow.
Yeah. The N was eventually dropped before consonant sounds because it simply made the words flow together more easily. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it shows how spoken language naturally gravitates towards efficiency. It's a subtle, almost unconscious process for sounds to simplify over time, especially in unstressed positions where clarity isn't sacrificed.
Makes sense.
Language isn't just about rigid rules, it's about what feels natural and efficient to articulate, reflecting how the human mouth and ear interact.
That makes perfect sense. It's like the language itself is finding the path of least resistance.
Now, beyond the indefinite article, there's also the versatile prefix a that pops up in so many other words. It's not always the same A, is it? I always find that confusing.
No, and this is where it gets a little tricky, but also incredibly revealing about the layered, almost archaeological nature of English. The prefix "a" actually has at least two main origins that look identical, but are entirely distinct.
Okay, to origin.
One comes directly from Greek. When "a" is from Greek, it functions as a privative prefix, adding the sense of not or without.
Ah, like atheist.
Exactly. Think of words like atheistic, which means not believing in God, or acephalous, meaning literally without a head. You also see its variant "an" before vowels to avoid a hiatus, like a little break, as in anemia, which means without blood or a lack of blood.
Okay, so a Greek A means negation, a complete absence. What's the other origin then? That's the one I got tripped up on.
The other significant "a" comes from Old English, and it's actually an unstressed, reduced form of the Old English word "on," O-N,
On, just on.
just "on." This "a" adds a completely different set of meanings, often related to motion, direction, or state. For instance, it can mean to or towards, as in a back, where you're literally on your back or thrown back.
Oh, okay.
Or in the process of like a hunting, meaning literally on hunting or engaged in hunting.
So if someone was hunting, they were literally on hunting or in the process of hunting, actively involved in the pursuit. That's fascinating. It captures a real sense of present action.
Precisely. It can also mean in a specified state, as in a flutter, meaning in a state of fluttering, or simply on, like a fit, meaning on fit.
A foot, sure.
And you even see it subtly embedded in words like nowadays, which derives from in days. So what does this all mean for us, the everyday English speakers?
Yeah, what's the takeaway?
It means a tiny a can carry a double meaning or even an opposite meaning, like not versus on, depending on its ancient roots. It's a great example of homonyms in prefixes, where the same spelling has distinct historical origins and different semantic contributions.
Like bank, riverbank, or money bank.
Exactly like that. Context almost always clarifies which A you're dealing with, but knowing the origins reveals just how deep and complex the linguistic well runs.
That's a powerful distinction, and it makes you appreciate the underlying history of every word. And speaking of prefixes with specific directional meanings, what about ab? A-B.
The prefix ab is from Latin, and it's pretty straightforward, generally adding the sense of from or away.
From or away.
Okay, so when you abduct someone, you quite literally lead them away. And abort literally means to cease to be born or to go away from the natural course of development.
Right.
This away sense also plays into words like abscond, which means to hide oneself and get away hurriedly and secretly, often to avoid detection.
Abscond, right. Get away.
Or abstract, which means drawn away, originally referring to something extracted or separated, and only later, much later, to art that is drawn away from concrete reality. It's a consistent meaning that helps you understand the core sense of these words just by knowing that little prefix.
So abstract art is literally drawn away from reality. That's a neat connection. It gives a new depth to the term. And then there's ad, A-D, which also feels like it means to or towards, but has its own unique story.
That's right. Ad comes from Latin too, T-O, and it adds senses of motion or direction, like in advance, moving towards a goal.
Advance, okay.
It can also signify reduction or change, as seen in adapt, meaning to make to fit, or adulterate, meaning to corrupt something by adding elements to it, often to make it impure.
Adapt, adulterate. Okay.
And quite simply, it can mean addition, like an adjunct, something joined to another. What's particularly interesting about add is its historical influence on English spelling.
How so?
In the 16th century, add and its various assimilated forms like ac in access or af in effect began to replace a from other origins. This sometimes led to, well, kind of artificial spellings, especially when scholars tried to Latinize words.
Latinize them, like make them look more Latin.
Exactly. For example, advance. It actually came from the old French avancer, A-V-A-N-C-E-R, where the did was completely mute. It wasn't pronounced at all.
No did sound.
None.
Yeah.
But because of the pervasive influence of the Latin ad, that did was artificially added back into the English spelling, and then it just stuck.
So the D in ants is kind of a historical ghost that became very, very real, even though it wasn't originally there in the direct French ancestor of the word.
Precisely. It's a testament to how academic and prescriptive influences can sometimes override phonetic evolution, especially when there's a perceived link to prestigious Latin roots. It shows that language isn't just about how we speak, it's also about how people thought it should be spelled and what they believed its origins were.
Huh.
When you see these prefixes now, you can start to spot these hidden meanings and appreciate the layers of history, the mistakes, and the scholarly interventions in seemingly simple words. It's like having a little decoder ring for the English language, helping you glimpse its fascinating past.
Okay, now let's talk about some real jaw-droppers words that started one way and ended up somewhere completely different. This is where the unexpected twists in a word's life truly come to light, revealing how adaptable and sometimes unpredictable language can be.
Indeed. It's truly fascinating how a word's meaning can drift over time, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically, often mirroring shifts in society and culture. Let's look at a few examples where meaning shifted from the physical to the figurative, showing how we often use concrete actions as metaphors for abstract ideas.
Okay, like abase. A-B-A-S-E. We use it today to mean making someone feel ashamed or humiliated, right? A form of belittlement.
That's a perfect example of this physical to figurative shift. Abase came into late Middle English from Old French abaisser, which meant quite literally to lower, L-O-W-E-R.
To lower. Physically.
Physically, this French verb was based on the late Latin basis, meaning short of stature or low. So originally, abase literally meant to lower something or someone in a physical sense. Shakespeare used it that way in Richard III, saying, "Will she yet abase her eyes on me?" which implied a literal lowering of her gaze.
Just looking down.
Exactly. But over time, influenced by the English word base, meaning ignoble or morally low, it evolved. Now, as you said, its common modern use is reflexive, like he would not abase himself by such behavior, meaning he wouldn't belittle himself or bring himself to a state of shame or dishonor.
Right, humiliate himself.
This raises an important question.
Oh.
How does a literal action of lowering something physically transform into a concept of belittlement or debasement? It reflects how we inherently use physical actions as metaphors for abstract concepts of status, dignity, and morality.
So it's not just lowering something, it's making it low in a moral or social sense.
Okay.
What about abash? A-B-A-S-H. That one always sounds like sudden, mortified embarrassment.
It does now, but its Middle English root meant cause to feel disconcerted, coming from Old French related to aspair, meaning astound.
Astound, like amazed.
Yes, amazed, astounded. The base of aspair is thought to be ba, a natural expression of astonishment or surprise.
Wow.
So one of its early meanings in English was actually to stand speechless in amazement or to be utterly confounded by something. Imagine the wide-eyed wonder of early abash at a miracle, contrasting vividly with the flushed, downcast embarrassment of modern abash at a faux pas.
Wow.
It moved from being stunned by awe to being stunned by shame or confusion. A very dramatic emotional shift.
That's a huge shift from awe to profound embarrassment. And abyss is a word we know for a deep, seemingly bottomless pit. But you mentioned it has a surprising, almost poetic link to abrupt. How does that work?
Yes, that's a beautiful literary connection. Abrupt came into English in the late 16th century, meaning broken off, steep, directly from the Latin abrumpere, which means to break off.
Broken off, okay.
In certain literary contexts, particularly in the 17th century, abrupt was actually used as a noun meaning abyss or a sheer drop. Think of John Milton's Paradise Lost, where he writes, "Upborne with indefatigable wings over the vast abrupt."
The vast abrupt. Imagine calling a deep chasm the vast abrupt. It paints such a vivid picture of something suddenly broken off, a sheer, terrifying drop into nothingness. It's much more active and sudden than just abyss.
It truly does. It highlights how poets and writers can push the boundaries of language, coining new meanings that resonate with readers and sometimes become established. Now let's explore words that have taken a decidedly negative turn over time, even if their original sense was neutral or different. These shifts often tell us about evolving societal values or legal frameworks.
Like abet. ABT. We mostly hear that in legal contexts now, always for something bad, like aid and abet.
Precisely. Abet came from late Middle English, from Old French abetter, meaning to hound, urge on. Crucially, in its early use, abet involved urging for both good and bad things.
Both. So you could urge someone to do good.
Absolutely. You could abet someone in a noble cause, like encouraging them in their studies or supporting them in a virtuous endeavor, but now it is almost exclusively and strongly associated with wrongdoing.
Yeah, entirely negative now.
The phrase aid and abet, specifically in legal contexts for assisting in illegal acts, became widely used from the late 18th century onwards, cementing its negative connotation. This highlights how legal and societal contexts can narrow a word's meaning, linking it primarily to negative connotations, even if its root was originally quite neutral, simply meaning to urge on.
So if you abetted someone in the 14th century, you might have just been encouraging them in their studies. Wow. What about addicted? That's another word that's pretty exclusively negative now, implying a serious problem.
You're right, it's overwhelmingly negative today. But addicted, in the mid-16th century, came from Latin addict, meaning assigned by decree or devoted.
Devoted, like positively.
Yes, its obsolete meaning was simply bound or devoted to someone or something. You could be addicted to a cause or addicted to virtue in a purely positive sense, meaning you are highly committed or devoted.
Addicted to virtue. That sounds so strange now.
Doesn't it? The shift really came in the early 20th century with the appearance of addict and addiction, specifically in the context of alcohol and drugs. As society grappled with public health issues related to substance abuse, the word became almost overwhelmingly tied to this negative and compulsive behavior.
Think about how we use addicted today. It's almost exclusively negative, yet it once just meant devoted. A fascinating shift in how we label deep commitment, particularly in relation to substance use, which became a major social and medical concern, leading to a profound recategorization of the word.
And then there's aggravate. This one still causes arguments among language enthusiasts, ironically enough.
Okay, let's unpack this. The annoy meaning of aggravate has been around for centuries, right? But some people still get really worked up about it. Why is that?
They absolutely do. Aggravate came into English in the mid-16th century from Latin aggravare, meaning make heavy, from add to and gravis heavy. So its original literal meaning was to make something worse, more serious, or heavier, for example. The illness was aggravated by poor nutrition.
Right. Make heavier, make worse. Standard.
Standard. The sense of annoy, or irritate, however, dates from the 17th century and has been used by prominent writers ever since. So it's not some new, incorrect usage.
Not new at all, then.
Not at all. But some traditionalists, the prescriptivists, still regard it as incorrect, viewing it as too radical a departure from the original make heavy. This raises an important question. Who decides what a word means?
Yeah, who does decide?
It's a great example of prescriptivism versus descriptivism in language. Prescriptivism is essentially arguing how language should be used, often based on perceived logical consistency or older forms.
The rule followers.
Kind of, yeah. While descriptivism observes how it is actually used by speakers. Ultimately, a popular usage, or descriptivism, often shapes a word's destiny, frequently against the wishes of those who prefer older, more correct meanings. Think about decimate.
Oh, right. That used to mean reduced by a tenth, didn't it?
Exactly. But now it colloquially means to utterly destroy or wipe out. Common usage won that battle, even though the original meaning was very specific. Same sort of thing with aggravate, meaning annoy.
It seems like common usage always wins in the end, doesn't it? The living language has a way of deciding for itself. Let's move on to words that shifted from a very specific meaning to a more general one, or sometimes the other way around. Alibi is a great example of narrowing its scope.
It truly is. Alibi first appeared in the late 17th century as an adverb, directly from the Latin alibi, meaning elsewhere. E-L-S-E-W-H-E-R-E.
Just elsewhere.
Just elsewhere. So you might say he was alibi at the time of the crime, meaning he was elsewhere. The noun use, as in a legal excuse for being elsewhere at the time of the crime, he had a strong alibi, dates from the late 18th century. So it went from a general adverb describing location to a very specific legal noun, focusing on the proof of being elsewhere.
And Alien has certainly had quite the journey from simply other to something out of a sci-fi movie.
Absolutely. In Middle English, alien came from Latin alienus, and it simply meant belonging to another or generally other or foreign. Think of an alien concept or an alien culture.
Just different, unfamiliar.
Exactly. Now, it certainly still refers to a foreigner or something strange or unfamiliar, but of course, since the widespread popularity of science fiction in the 1950s, it's famously used for beings from another planet, a very specific and popular modern usage that wasn't even conceivable for much of its history. That's a huge cultural shift driving a linguistic one.
From just other to little green men, often with ray guns. What about actor? That seems like a straightforward profession today.
Actor came from late Middle English, from Latin actor meaning doer, actor. Its original meaning was simply an agent or an administrator, someone who does something or acts on behalf of another.
A doer, not a performer.
Not necessarily. The theatrical sense, the one we commonly use today for someone performing on a stage, didn't appear until the 16th century. So for centuries, an actor was someone who did things, who was active, not necessarily someone who performed them for an audience.
That's a subtle but significant distinction, shifting from any kind of doer to a specific type of performer. And anatomy originally meant something very literal and perhaps a bit gory, right?
Yes, anatomy in late Middle English came from Greek, and it literally meant cutting up, from and the comia, cutting.
Cutting up.
It was a direct reference to the physical act of dissection of a body. Over time, it evolved to mean the study of body structure, which of course involves cutting up or dissecting, but is a broader academic and scientific discipline encompassing far more than just the physical act. The process became the field of study.
Okay, makes sense. And art, that's a huge concept now, encompassing everything from painting to music, but it started much more narrowly, I imagine.
It did. In Middle English, art came from Latin ars, art meaning put together, joined, fit, and its early meaning was simply skill or craft.
Skill, like any skill.
Pretty much. So you can talk about the art of shoemaking, the art of cooking, or the art of war. It referred to any practical skill, especially one involving systematic application of knowledge. Later, it broadened to become a subject area where skill is obtained, leading to terms like the liberal arts, or the arts as branches of study at university. It wasn't until the early 17th century that art specifically referred to the application of skill according to aesthetic principles, as in painting, sculpture, and architecture.
Ah, the fine arts.
Exactly. This showcases how the concept of skill broadened from practical trades to include intellectual and aesthetic pursuits, reflecting changing societal values, the rise of specialized knowledge, and the professionalization of these creative fields.
Sometimes the evolution of a word isn't about its meaning changing, but about how it's spelled or even pronounced. And what's truly fascinating is that sometimes those changes are based on a misunderstanding, a mistake, or even just a lazy ear. It's captivating to see how language self-corrects, or sometimes doesn't, leaving behind these wonderful linguistic fossils.
Indeed. One of the most common and delightful categories of these shifts is what linguists call misdivision, where the boundary between words gets misinterpreted over time, often involving indefinite articles like a or an.
Misdivision. Okay, like adder. That's the type of venomous snake, right?
Yes, a snake. But in Old English, the word was actually nedra, N-E-D-R-E, meaning serpent or snake.
Nedra, not adder.
Nedra. The initial N was lost in Middle English through a process of what sounds like wrong division of the phrase anadra. People heard anadra
Ah, anadra.
and reinterpreted it as an adder, thereby absorbing the N into the article and dropping it from the noun. It's quite playful to imagine the pronunciation shift from anadra versus an adder. It's an example of how the ear can sometimes overrule the original morphological structure of words, especially with common articles.
So it's like a linguistic oopsie that just stuck. The article literally stole part of the noun. And apron had a similar journey, didn't it? I think I remember this one.
Precisely the same phenomenon. In Middle English, the word was actually naperon, N-A-P-E-R-O-N, which was a diminutive of the Old French nape, meaning tablecloth, like napkin.
Naparon to apron.
Same thing happened. The initial N was lost by a wrong division of an apron, becoming an apron. This pattern of misdivision, like in an adro becoming an adder and an apron becoming an apron, is a common linguistic phenomenon where the ear reinterprets word boundaries. It's not an error per se, but rather an organic shift in pronunciation that becomes cemented in spelling. It shows how language is a living system, constantly adapting for ease of articulation and how sounds naturally flow together.
That's amazing how a simple article can eat part of the noun, reshaping the word itself. Now, what about words where the derivations were completely mistaken, sometimes by very influential people who then set a standard?
A classic and somewhat humorous example is ache, A-C-H-E.
Ache, like pain.
Exactly. The Old English noun was A-T-C-H-E and the verb was a can, A-C-A-N. In Middle English, the noun was spelled H, A-T-C-H-E, and rhymed with the letter name H, like H, but the verb was pronounced as it is today, like ache.
So the noun and verb sounded different.
Originally, yeah. The pronunciation of these two parts of speech became similar around 1700. However, the modern spelling of the noun, and especially the verb, is largely due to Dr. Samuel Johnson,
The dictionary guy.
the dictionary guy himself. He mistakenly assumed its derivation from the Greek akos, meaning pain. And so, based on this incorrect etymology, he spelled the verb like the noun ache with a CH, and it stuck, influencing English spelling for centuries to come.
So one of the most influential figures in the English language essentially made a spelling error based on a faulty etymological guess, and that mistake became the standard for centuries. This is where it gets really interesting, because it shows the immense power of authority in standardizing language, even when that authority is based on a mistaken belief or a scholarly best guess that later turns out to be wrong.
It absolutely does, highlighting that even language authorities are fallible, and sometimes their interpretations become linguistic law. Another fascinating instance of a mistaken derivation is abominable.
Abominable, terrible, awful.
Right. In Middle English, it was widely believed to be from ab, meaning away from, and the Latin hominy from homo, meaning human being.
Ab homine, away from human.
That was the folk etymology, giving this a sense of inhuman, beastly, or away from human nature. This led to it frequently being spelled abominable, A-B-H-O-M-I-N-A-B-L-E, until the 17th century. Even Shakespeare's First Folio uses this abominable spelling 18 times.
Abominable. Wow. That spelling really drives home the inhuman or away from humanity idea, which is a powerful folk etymology.
It does, but that was folk etymology at play, where speakers over time try to make sense of a word's origin by associating it with a more familiar one, even if that association is completely incorrect.
So what's the real origin then?
The word actually comes via Old French from Latin abominabilis, from abominare, meaning to deprecate as an ill omen, or to turn away from something ill-omened. Its base elements are ab, meaning away from, and omen, O-M-E-N.
Omen, like a bad sign, not human.
Exactly. So it was originally about ill omens, not inhumanity. It's a natural attempt to create a narrative for a word, showing our innate desire for coherence and a logical story behind the sounds we make.
That's a powerful example of how people construct meaning, sometimes erroneously but persistently. And Auburn also has a surprising spelling-induced shift, where its actual color changed over time.
Yes, Auburn, A-U-B-U-R-N. In late Middle English, it came from Latin alburnus, meaning whitish, which itself derives from albus, meaning white.
Wait, Auburn meant whitish, not reddish-brown.
Originally, yes.
Yeah.
Its original sense in English was yellowish-white or off-white, but it became associated with brown, specifically a reddish-brown, because in the 16th and 17th centuries, it was often written a brune or a brune, perhaps influenced by words like brown. The spelling literally influenced the perceived color of the word.
Next time you hear Auburn, you'll know it's a word that literally changed its color over time, simply because of a slight shift in how people spelled and then pronounced or heard it. That's truly wild. Now let's talk about the incredible influences from other languages and cultures, showing how our vocabulary is a grand tapestry of global interactions.
One of my favorites is admiral. It sounds so thoroughly English and naval, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Very Royal Navy.
But its roots are far from it, reflecting centuries of cross-cultural exchange. It came into Middle English from Old French amiral, or admiral, which in turn came via medieval Latin from Arabic amir, A-M-I-R, meaning commander or prince.
Amir, from Arabic.
Yes. The ad prefix we discussed earlier was an artificial Latinization added by European scholars trying to make it look more Latin, and the al ending was from Arabic al, meaning of the.
So it was something like possibly commander of the sea.
Precisely. The modern maritime use of admiral owes its existence to the office of Emir of the Sea, which was created by the Arabs in Spain and Sicily. This powerful naval title was later adopted by Christian kings in the Mediterranean, like the French and Spanish, and then by the English under King Edward III in the 14th century, initially as Amiral of the Sea or Admiral of the Navy.
Wow.
The original Arabic use of the title became obsolete around 1500, leaving admiral as the premier naval term we know today in English. What's truly fascinating here is how a prestigious naval title in English directly traces its lineage to an Arabic military term, illustrating the profound cultural and military exchange that shaped European languages during the Middle Ages.
That's a phenomenal journey for a word, from the Arabian Peninsula to the British Navy. And alcohol also comes from Arabic, but its early meaning is even more unexpected.
Indeed. Alcohol came into English in the mid-16th century, from Arabic al-Kuhl, meaning the kohl, K-O-H-L.
Like eyeliner.
It's exactly like eyeliner. Now, kohl was a fine powder, often made of antimony, used to stain eyelids, particularly in the Middle East. So in its early use in English, alcohol referred specifically to these fine powders obtained by sublimation, essentially, the purest essence of a substance, usually solid, created through a heating process.
So alcohol was a powder.
Originally, yes. It wasn't until the mid-17th century that it came to describe any highly distilled spirit, particularly alcohol of wine.
So the same word that describes your favorite distilled spirit, a liquid, once referred to powdered eyeliner, that's quite a leap. It shows how the science of distillation, even in its early forms, could influence word usage, transferring a term for fine powders to fine, concentrated liquids that were also essences.
And Amazon has a particularly layered history, stemming from ancient myth and moving into modern commerce, reflecting shifts in exploration, geography, and even global economics.
I know the mythical female warriors and, of course, the huge river in South America, but what's the other layer? You mentioned commerce.
Well, the legendary female warriors are the original meaning, coming from Greek mythology. The Greeks themselves had a folk etymology for it, explaining it as breastless, from a without and Maso's breast, believing the Amazons cut off a breast to aid in archery.
Right, I've heard that story. Probably not true, though.
Likely a mistaken derivation of an unknown foreign word, an attempt by the Greeks to explain a pre-existing myth. The river Amazon was named after the belief among early European explorers, notably Francisco de Orellana in the 16th century, that they encountered female warriors on its banks, a geographical application of the myth.
Okay, myth, river. What's the modern twist?
But here's where it gets really interesting for us today. Since the 1990s, Amazon has become a verb. Due to the immense success of Amazon.com, Inc., the internet bookseller that grew into a global commerce giant.
Ah, that Amazon.
Exactly. Phrases like businesses are being Amazoned or reshaped by the internet emerged. This raises an important question. How can a single word, rooted in ancient myth and initially describing legendary figures, become a symbol for a massive geographical marvel and then an economic force that utterly reshapes global commerce, effectively becoming a verb meaning to dominate or disrupt a market?
That's incredible.
It's a profound testament to language's adaptability and how new cultural phenomena can seize upon existing words and infuse them with entirely new, powerful meanings.
Sometimes words that seem totally unrelated on the surface with completely different modern meanings are actually long-lost cousins, sharing a surprising common ancestor. It's like finding out your neighbor's friendly golden retriever is actually related to a wild wolf. The connection might not be obvious at first glance, but it's definitely there when you dig a little deeper into their lineage.
It's true. Etymology often reveals these hidden family ties, showing how a core concept can branch out into vastly different semantic pathways. Let's look at the power of beating and felling in an abbot and abattoir.
Okay, abate, A-B-A-T-E, means to become less intense, like a storm abating or a headache abating. An abattoir, A-B-A-T-T-O-I-R, is a slaughterhouse. Those seem worlds apart. One is about diminishing, the other about a place of violent death.
On the surface, yes, they appear to be worlds apart. But abate came into Middle English from Old French abattre, which meant to fell or to strike down.
Fell, like chop down a tree.
Exactly. This French verb was based on the Latin atu and battuere, to beat. So the core notion was originally beating repeatedly or striking down. From that very physical and often violent action, a beat developed into the sense of giving way, making less intense, or becoming less powerful, as in the noise abated gradually or the fever abated.
So beating down became lessening.
Okay.
Yeah. And abattoir, how does that connect to beating?
Abattoir was adopted directly from French in the early 19th century, also from abattre, to fell, or to strike down, specifically referring to felling animals for slaughter.
Ah, striking down animals.
Right. The English synonym slaughterhouse had, of course, existed for a long time. What's fascinating here is how the literal act of beating or felling something can lead to such divergent senses, reducing intensity in abate and a place of slaughter in abattoir. It shows how a core physical action can diverge into vastly different semantic pathways, yet both originate from the same powerful, even violent root of striking something down.
That's a strong shared lineage for such different outcomes. It makes you think about how metaphors extend. Now, what about the theme of shortening? I know abbreviate and abridge both mean to shorten something. Are they literally related, or is that just a coincidence?
They absolutely are related, almost like identical twins who took slightly different paths. Abbreviate came into late Middle English from the Latin adjective brevis, meaning short, B-R-E-V-I-S.
Brevis, short, like brief.
Exactly, via the Latin verb abbreviare, to shorten. Early examples of abbreviare were often in contexts where narration was shortened by omitting details, or a word was shortened for convenience.
And abridge, A-B-R-I-D-G-E.
Abridge came into Middle English from Old French abrigiere, which also derived from the late Latin abbreviare, to cut short. Its prime current sense, dating from late Middle English, relates specifically to cutting short texts, summaries, or narratives.
So they both come from abbreviare.
Directly. So these two words, which often feel like perfect synonyms and can be used almost interchangeably in some contexts, literally come from the exact same Latin root for short. It's a great example of how different paths of borrowing into English from a common source, Latin via different Romance languages like Old French, can lead to very similar or even identical destinations in English vocabulary. They're like parallel evolutionary lines in the linguistic family tree.
That's a clear connection once you see it, and it makes them easier to remember. But prepare for this one. Acme and acne. A-C-M-E and A-C-N-E. How on earth are the highest point and a common skin breakout related? This sounds like a linguistic prank.
This is truly one of the most delightful and surprising aha moments in etymology, revealing the accidental nature of some linguistic shifts. Acme came into English in the late 16th century, directly from the Greek acme, meaning highest point, peak, or prime.
Acme, the peak. Got it.
Until the 18th century, it was often consciously used as a Greek word, maintaining its sense of perfection or the absolute zenith of something.
So the peak of perfection, the ultimate point.
Mm.
But then acne. I'm picturing a Mount Everest of pimples here.
Well, that's not far off in terms of a visual connection. Acne arrived much later, in the mid-19th century, entering English from modern Latin. And here's the kicker. It came from the Greek aknes. Aknas,
Aknas.
which was a misreading or scribal error for Akhmas, Akmas.
Akmas.
And Akhmas is the accusative plural of Acme, that very same word meaning highest point, peak.
No way. Acne comes from acme because someone misspelled it.
Essentially, yes. In ancient Greek medical texts, acme was also used to refer to a facial eruption, or a peak of a disease, like its most intense phase, or even the peak of the face where pimples might appear. So the connection was there conceptually.
Ah, the peak of an eruption.
Right. This raises an important question. How does a word meaning the highest point connect to a skin eruption? It's a remarkable linguistic detour, starting with an anatomical peak or the peak of an illness, and then through a simple scribal error by a medical writer, shifting its form and eventually becoming the common word for a very common skin condition. It's a wonderful aha moment that highlights the sometimes completely accidental nature of language evolution. A single misplaced letter can change everything.
That is truly wild. It's like a typo that became a medical condition that millions of people experience. It makes you wonder how many common words owe their existence to someone just misreading a document. Okay, let's look at another surprisingly interconnected family. Aliment, alimony, and alumnus. What do food, financial support after a divorce, and former students have in common? They seem completely disparate.
This is a beautiful linguistic connection centered around the fundamental human concept of nourishment, or being nourished. Aliment, A-L-I-M-E-N-T, came into English in the late 15th century from Latin alimentum, meaning nourishment or food.
Aliment, nourishment. Okay.
This, in turn, comes from the Latin verb alere, A-L-E-R-E, to nourish or to feed. So aliment refers directly to sustenance, to that which sustains life.
That makes perfect sense, like the alimentary canal for food digestion.
Exactly. Now, alimony, A-L-I-M-O-N-Y, came into English in the early 17th century, also from Latin alimonium, meaning nutriment or means of support. Its early sense in English was broader, nourishment or means of subsistence.
So not just divorce payments initially.
Not initially. It wasn't until later, primarily in the U.S. legal system, that it narrowed to its current main use for maintenance payments made after a divorce settlement, still, fundamentally, a form of financial nourishment or support provided to a former spouse.
So it's about providing for someone even if the relationship has ended.
Okay.
And alumnus, A-L-U-M-N-U-S. How do former students fit into this nourishment theme?
Alumnus, arriving in the mid-17th century, is a direct borrowing from a Latin word alumnus, which meant nursling, foster child, or pupil.
Nursling, like someone being nursed.
Exactly. And it, too, comes from that same Latin verb alere, to nourish or to rear. A nursling is someone who is being nourished, educated, or raised. So a university or school is seen as nourishing its students, providing them with intellectual sustenance.
Nourishing the mind.
Precisely. And thus, former students are its alumni or alumni. So whether you're talking about food itself, financial support after a divorce, or a former student, all these words literally trace back to the deeply human idea of nourishment or being nourished, demonstrating how core human needs and societal structures are embedded in our vocabulary, even when they seem disparate on the surface.
Words aren't just sounds and spellings, they are incredible time capsules, carrying within them stories of ancient beliefs, pivotal historical events, and even ingrained social prejudices or cultural biases. They show us how deeply culture is woven into the very fabric of our language, reflecting the values and preoccupations of their time.
Indeed. These are some of those compelling stories in etymology, as they connect language directly to human history and belief systems. Let's start with abracadabra. Today, it's a whimsical word associated with stage magicians and children's games.
Right, like something a magician says before pulling a rabbit out of a hat, purely for entertainment. Poof!
But abracadabra came into English in the late 17th century from Latin, and it was first recorded in a 2nd century medical poem by a Gnostic physician named Cyrenus Simonicus. Its base is believed to be Greek or Aramaic, with origins shrouded in ancient mysticism.
2nd century. Wow!
Crucially, it was originally a powerful mystical word, not for entertainment, but a serious therapeutic charm used to ward off illness, particularly fevers like malaria.
A charm against malaria. How did it work?
It was usually engraved on an amulet or written on parchment in the form of a triangle. You'd write the full word on the first line, then remove the last letter on the next line, and so on.
Abracadabra. Abracadabra.
Ah.
All the way down.
Exactly, until only A remained at the bottom. This paper was then placed in an amulet and worn around the neck, believed to draw the illness out of the body as the letters disappeared.
That's incredible.
This shows how words were once imbued with a powerful, almost ritualistic function. It connects us to a time when language wasn't just for communication or entertainment, but for invoking protection and healing, for tangible effects on the world.
So it was a medical prescription or a protective word. That's incredible, shifting from a life or death charm to a playful incantation. What about ambidextrous? That means equally skilled with both hands, a very useful ability.
That's its modern meaning, coming into use in the mid-17th century. It combines the Latin meaning on both sides and dexter meaning right-handed.
Wait. Right-handed, so ambidextrous literally means right-handed on both sides.
Literally. The Latin focus on right-handedness in both parts of the word, even when describing equal skill with both hands, strongly shows the historical tendency to consider the right as the strong, correct, skillful, or even morally good hand, while the left was often associated with awkwardness or even evil. The word sinister itself originally meant left.
So even in a word meaning equal skill with both hands, we see the historical bias towards the right hand. It's embedded right there in the etymology, reflecting a perception that persisted in educational and social contexts for a considerable time, often to the detriment of left-handed individuals who were sometimes forced to switch hands.
Absolutely. This pervasive societal preference for the right hand found its way into the very structure of the word, a subtle but persistent cultural echo. Now we must talk about Aryan, A-R-Y-A-N. This is a word with a very dark shadow in recent history, and its evolution serves as a stark warning about the power and perversion of language.
It certainly is. In modern context, it's often immediately associated with abhorrent ideologies and horrific historical events. We need to tread carefully here.
Exactly. And just to be absolutely clear, we're discussing the history of the word based on our source material, not endorsing any of the ideologies associated with its misuse.
Understood. Reporting, not endorsing. So what's the origin?
Aryan came into English in the late 15th century based on the Sanskrit Arya, which originally meant noble or honorable and was used as an endonym by the ancient Indo-Iranians. In the 19th century, it was used by some scholars as an equivalent for the term Indo-European when referring to a major language family based on their supposed common linguistic ancestry. So initially, it was primarily a linguistic or academic term with neutral or even positive connotations of noble.
Okay, noble or related to Indo-European languages. Neutral enough.
However, the tragedy of this word began in the 19th century when the notion of an Aryan race corresponding to a definite language group became current among some European scholars. This dangerous concept was then picked up by nationalistic writers, notably Arthur de Gobineau, a French diplomat and anthropologist, who linked the idea to a notion of racial purity and the supposed inferiority of certain races.
Ah, here's the turn.
Yes. Later, the term Aryan race was revived and tragically used as a central piece of propaganda in Nazi Germany from 1933 to 1945 to denote a supposed master race of non-Jewish Caucasians, particularly those of Nordic descent. This raises an important question about the profound and dangerous ways a word's meaning can be warped and weaponized by ideological movements, completely divorcing it from its original innocent linguistic context.
Right.
The tragic history of Aryan serves as a stark reminder of the critical importance of understanding a word's true origin and how it's used, and how seemingly academic terms can be twisted for horrific ends. Again, we are simply relating the history as found in the sources.
It's a powerful and somber example of how language can be perverted, transforming a word of noble origin into a symbol of horrific prejudice and violence.
Wow.
Let's move to a word that also has a fascinating, if violent, history: assassin. A-S-S-A-S-S-A.
Assassin came into English in the mid-16th century, either from French or medieval Latin, but its ultimate origin is Arabic Ashishiyin, or Ashishi, meaning hashi eater.
Ashish eater. Seriously?
Seriously. This term was applied to a specific historical group. Certain Muslim fanatics during the Crusades, roughly 11th to 13th centuries, who were reportedly sent by their leader, known as the Old Man of the Mountain, or Sheikh al-Jabal, to murder Christian leaders and other political figures. It was believed, perhaps inaccurately or hyperbolically, that these individuals were under the influence of hashish when carrying out their missions.
So the story, true or not, linked hashish use to these killers.
Right. This specific dark historical context led to the association with the murder of any public or political figure, a meaning that has now become generalized to any murderer, especially one who targets prominent individuals.
From hashish eater to a highly specialized murderer of public figures, that's quite a transformation for a word, directly tied to a very specific and violent historical context of medieval religious conflict.
Indeed. It illustrates how vivid historical narratives, even if embellished, can profoundly shape a word's meaning and resonance for centuries. Now, let's look at the shifting meaning of care and refuge through words like assiduity and asylum, showing how even abstract concepts evolve in our language.
Assiduity. Assiduity. That means careful diligence, right? You apply yourself with assiduity to a task, but what's its origin?
Assiduity in late Middle English came from Latin assiduus, which was based on assiduous, meaning occupied with or constant inattention. The base verb for assiduous is assidir, which literally means to sit by.
To sit by, like sitting next to something.
Exactly. So the original notion was about physically sitting by a task or person, signifying constant physical presence and attention. Current semantics, of course, involve care and diligence, which are abstract features of being constantly occupied and attentive to the task in hand. The physical act of staying put next to something morphed into the mental act of dedication and perseverance.
That's a beautiful image, the idea of literally sitting by your work, to be diligent, staying with it until it's done. And asylum, ASYLUM, has definitely had quite a journey in its meaning, reflecting changing social attitudes towards those seeking safety.
It absolutely has. In late Middle English, asylum came via Latin from Greek asylon, meaning refuge. Its original broader meaning was a place of inviolable refuge, especially for criminals or debtors. Literally from without, and salon, right of seizure.
Without right of seizure, so a place you couldn't be arrested.
Exactly, a place where one could not be seized or dragged away by force of law. This often referred to churches or other sacred sites where fugitives could find sanctuary.
Okay, sanctuary.
The current sense is referring to a place of political refuge for those fleeing persecution, or quite differently to an institution for the mentally ill, date primarily from the 18th century.
Ah, the insane asylum image.
Right. The journey of asylum from a general, inviolable sacred place to a mental institution, often with negative connotations, and then back, in some contexts, to a safe haven for refugees, tells us a lot about changing societal attitudes towards vulnerability, justice, and protection. It reflects evolving legal, medical, and humanitarian concepts over centuries, showing how society defines safety and care for its most vulnerable members.
As we wrap up this deep dive into word histories, what becomes abundantly clear is that language is never static. It's not a rigid set of rules cast in stone, but a living, breathing entity, constantly evolving, adapting, and surprising us in its twists and turns.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, every word we speak carries echoes of the past, like a continuous conversation across centuries. We've seen how prefixes, those invisible architects, build meaning, sometimes with surprising homonyms like a, that create entirely different senses from identical spellings.
Right, the Greek A versus the Old English A.
Exactly. We've explored the unpredictable nature of semantic shifts, where words take unexpected detours, physical to figurative, positive to negative, driven by cultural, social, and technological changes.
Like a bash going from awe to embarrassment.
Precisely. We've uncovered the often hidden influences of sound changes, spelling errors, and folk etymology like ache or adder or abominable, reminding us that language isn't always logical, but it is always human, reflecting our attempts to make sense of the world.
And sometimes failing hilariously, like with acne from Acme.
And sometimes failing hilariously. And we've observed how words connect across seemingly disparate concepts, revealing deep shared roots that might otherwise be invisible, like the nourishment family of element, alimony, and alumnus.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Ultimately, words are profound cultural artifacts, reflecting history, changing beliefs, and the very biases and innovations of their time. Think ambidextrous, or Aryan, or asylum. This encourages critical thinking, not just about what words mean on the surface, but how they came to mean it and what that tells us about our own time and the societies that shape them.
Absolutely. Hopefully this deep dive has given you a fresh perspective on the English language and made you a bit more of an armchair etymologist yourself, ready to spot these hidden stories. So next time you hear a common word, I challenge you to pause for a moment. Could adequate have once been about things being made equal?
Yes, it comes from Latin adequor, to make equal, from add to and equus, equal.
Or appreciate literally about setting a price or estimating value.
Spot on. From Latin appreciare to value estimate, from add to and precium price. This raises an important question for you to mull over as you go about your day. If words are constantly shifting and adapting, sometimes due to mistakes, sometimes due to cultural shifts, what new meanings are being forged right now in our own everyday conversations and digital interactions that will utterly surprise people centuries from now?
Yeah.
What seemingly simple word are we using today that might carry a wildly different cultural echo in the distant future, perhaps tied to a technology or a social trend that we take for granted.
Food for thought indeed. Thank you for joining us on the deep dive. Keep observing the language around you and perhaps do your own deep dives into the fascinating stories hidden in plain sight.